On this Friday night, the feds say they are now telling individual states if they were targeted by Russian hackers in the 2016 election. This may be a Friday night news dump, but it sure is important. We now know that 21 states' election systems were hacked in some way. That has been on the books. But what is brand new tonight, believe it or not, is the Department of Homeland Security telling those individual states for the first time. For example, in Wisconsin tonight, state officials say this is the, quote, first time the Trump administration informed them they were targeted by Russia. We are, of course, 10 months after the election. These notifications may obviously be tense for some Trump officials. They work for a man who still contradicts the evidence that Russia hacked the United States last year. Now, that's what the authorities are doing to help address potential Russian hacking in the future. Meanwhile, the Russia probe continues. Some Trump aides, quote, reaching out to headhunters to find jobs outside the administration. The surveillance of Paul Manafort back in the news with reports he was monitored after he left the Trump campaign. And Facebook handing their Russian ads over to investigators. Is Trump noticing this heat? Well, we ran the numbers here, and signs point to yes. Take a look at this. Trump had been tweeting about a dozen times a month about Russia in early summer, which fell to 5 in August, the last one on August 15th. Then, nothing. Trump went over a month, 38 days, without tweeting about Russia. And given his usual rate of tweeting, that suggests either his advisors or his lawyers convinced him he really was hurting himself with his tweets. But you know what? A tweet diet is really like any diet. The test is time. Anyone can diet for an hour. I'll go sometimes 2 hours without a cinnamon roll. A month, though, is harder. For Trump, we see 38 days was his breaking point as he picked up this Facebook news to slam the Russia hoax today. Well, Trump may reveal more than he intends. Is there something about Facebook and that issue that strikes too close to home? His return to tweeting about Russia violates the cardinal advice that Richard Nixon gave to President Reagan about how to avoid making a scandal worse. He wrote the president, don't ever comment on the Iran-Contra matter again. Have instructions issued to all White House staffers and spokesmen. They must never answer any question on or off the record about that issue in the future. That may be good Nixonian advice if you can follow it. Back with me is Joy Reid, and joining us, former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Renato, you look at the authorities giving this information finally to the states. Is there any good reason it should take 10 months?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly there can be reasons that you'd want to protect sources and methods, but a warning should have been given to these states that they needed to take action to protect themselves and the citizens of their state in the future. I mean, now they are up in a race against time. We have elections here in Illinois. We have an election coming up in March, a primary election, and voters in this state want to know, is their vote going to count? Is their vote going to be tampered with in some way? And I'm sure it's the same in all the rest of the states across this country. And really, now it's going to be up to state and local governments to step up and make sure that this matter is investigated and that their systems are protected so they can assure their citizens that this won't happen again.
You know, Joy, it's one of these things, we're sitting here, this is real.
Yeah.
This is 10 months later. This is not, wait, I think I heard about that. Didn't I see the headline? This is now, Friday night, 10 months later, and the feds say to the states individually, hey, I know you might have heard of 21 of you, 21, but instead of just guessing and wondering or checking it, we're actually going to help you out now. I'm just going to read from this so people understand what's out there. The Department of Homeland Security saying that earlier this year it had evidence of Russian activity in 21 states, but they failed to inform individual states whether they were among those targeted. State election officials finally contacted by federal authorities on Friday today.
Yeah, and it's, you know, one might deem it suspicious that the administration that benefited from Russian intervention in the election, that wasted no time deciding that they needed to launch a 50-state scheme to collect the private data of voters so that they could stop fictional voter fraud because they wanted to prove that somehow Donald Trump really did win the popular vote and there were millions of fraudulent voters. They've wasted no time impaneling a commission led by the vice president with known vote suppression experts like Chris Kobach on it. That didn't take any time at all. But DHS, which used to be headed by the now chief of staff, General Kelly, they couldn't get around to letting these states know until this late in the game when there's another election coming up at which control of the House and Senate, meaning control of the committees that can issue subpoenas that could pose a threat to this administration on the Russia investigation, took them this long to get around to it so states could prepare. I mean, one might deem that odd and suspicious if you had a conspiratorial mindset.
Well, or if, as you say, I like you connect the dots, you're telling me, oh yeah, John Kelly, that guy who's supposed to be everyone's savior and elicit the order. And I've reported on John Kelly. I respect his career.
Sure.
But if we're looking at this policy, I haven't heard a good defense from Kelly or anyone around him why this would take 10 months or why it's a Friday night news dump. We know how that works.
Yeah, the urgency around things like banning Muslim travelers, you know, immediately, that has to get done right away. They've got all these deadlines. It's super urgent that they stop people of the Muslim faith coming in the country. They've got interesting priorities. And again, they are the people who benefited from Russian intervention the last time. So they might have, even just for the optics of it, wanted to be a little more proactive. Right.
Well, there is an old question, cui bono, who benefits? We don't just do Jamaican sayings. We do Italian sayings.
I was just going to say, I thought you were going to come with another JA saying. I was getting ready for it, Mom. I'm ready.
Renato, we can laugh on Fridays even when we have serious news, at least when Joy's here. And I'm going to ask you the question, actually, in a second about who you want to interview. But before I get to that, I want to play for you something very interesting from a former national security official, Renato, about the other big news, which is this focus on Paul Manafort. And this may be bad for him without being as bad for Trump, depending on your theory of the case. Take a listen here to Jeremy Bash.
It's possible that Russia actually sent and dispatched Paul Manafort to the Trump campaign, or at least that once Paul Manafort attached himself to the Trump campaign, the Russians said, okay, our agent is now on the inside.
Are you saying it's possible that they're going to want to find out if Manafort was a Russian plant? Is that one of the questions the investigation is going to try to answer?
Absolutely.
Renato?
Wow. Well, that is really something. What I would say is that it would definitely be a primary purpose of the counterintelligence aspect of the investigation. On the criminal side of it, which I know a lot of people are focused on, and certainly as a former federal prosecutor I am, what I would say is that would be explosive evidence that probably would actually not be admitted into a trial unless it was very, very highly relevant, because you could imagine it so prejudicing a jury that they would not be focused on the issues that matter for the particular crimes that are charged. I mean, to me, one thing that we found out this week from the New York Times is that Manafort is somebody that Mueller intends to charge, and he has told Manafort that.
He's a target, according to that reporting, yeah.
Exactly right. And one thing we also saw this week, Ari, is that both Ty Cobb, who's the president's lawyer, and Vice President Pence distanced themselves from Paul Manafort. And I thought that was very interesting because what we saw was, for the first time, that the allegations had gotten so explosive, and I think this was right after the reporting about him offering special access to a Russian billionaire, that now he's not somebody that you want to keep in the fold. So, you know, if I represented Manafort, I would be telling my client, I don't know if you're going to get a pardon. You may be a fall guy here, and you need to be thinking about how you could help Mueller.
Right, and that isolation strategy is clear. And by the way, only Renato Mariotti, when asked a question about a potential secret spy, goes right into the evidentiary ruling in a potential trial. Just getting deep into the boring part of law school, but that's why we love your expertise. Joy, they're telling me I'm way over time, which that happens with great guests. If you could interview anyone right now on your show, who would you interview?
Right now, I think, you know, I'd go for Hillary Clinton.
Would you go for Hillary Clinton?
I would.
I had a hunch that was the answer. And Joy Reid's show tomorrow, Hillary Clinton, 10 a.m. I will be watching. I will be tweeting. I think a lot of people will. Joy Reid.
Thank you.
We will tune in. Thank you for joining us. And Renato,
I'm taking my swag with me.
Oh, are you?
Thank you.
Is that cleared?
Yes.
Because we always have to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it cleared. Oh, nice. Both of them. Thank you both. I appreciate it. All right. Nothing uglier up next than a breakup. And there's a new fight between Trump and his old allies, Bannon and Sarah Palin, playing out tonight.
But alas, 10 months later, guys, the swamp, it's trying to hijack this presidency.
When you look for
To support the next president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Well, this is a woman that from day one, I said, if I ever do this, I have to get her support. She feels it. She understands it better than anybody.
Trump had Palin's support then, but loyalty can be a one-way street. She's now lining up against Trump's pick in Alabama, Luther Strange. Trump rallying there tonight and trying to beat back a primary challenge from Judge Roy Moore, who has the backing now of Palin and Bannon.
I followed the judge's career for many years. And you know, he was deplorable before deplorable was cool.
That Republican judge's career includes using his post to pick fights on marriage equality and a Ten Commandments monument. In fact, an Alabama court ultimately kicked him out of office over his refusal to remove that religious monument from a courthouse. Joining me now is John Capehart from the Washington Post and Erin Gloria Ryan from the Daily Beast. Jonathan, what does this civil war tell us?
It tells it, you know, the one thing, Ari, it tells me is that the Republican Party, which has been at war with itself since the rise of the Tea Party, in 2010, when it lurched really hard to the right. Well, now it's lurching even more to the right, where you've got two people who you don't know who to root for between Luther Strange and Roy Moore. And so it's just a matter of the fringes of what used to be the fringes of the Republican Party having a battle with each other over who's going to take this seat. Because no matter what, whether, you know, Roy Moore has got Palin and Bannon and Luther Strange has the President of the United States, no matter who wins that race, that's a vote for President Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Erin Gloria Ryan, there's a little bit of the scene in The Dark Knight where you have the mobsters are like really scary, and you're like, who's going to scare us? But then when Heath Ledger's Joker comes in, you're like, oh, maybe there is someone even scarier. And there's that element here because this is a really conservative Republican senator backed by this insurgent pseudo-Republican president, Donald Trump. But Roy Moore, for anyone who's been following, has been ripping up Republican politics for years.
Right. Well, I think that there's a couple of things that this kind of reminds me of. First of all, I think that, like, the New York, D.C. media, and I realize that I'm a part of it, so it's probably rich for me to indict us at all, but I think the New York, D.C. media is always hungry for a narrative. And a really seductive narrative in this case is this narrative of, like, Trump versus Palin and Bannon. In reality, I think that the voters of Alabama are just going to decide for themselves. If celebrities determined who won elections, Hillary would have won 2016 in a landslide. Like,
wasn't she running against a bigger celebrity?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at all the, like, people lined up at, like, the DNC who were speaking for, like, Boyz II Men did, like, an opening number for her.
Motown Philly, I was there, yeah.
So was I. But I think that, like, you know, the narrative that this is, like, celebrities versus celebrities is entertaining, like professional wrestling is entertaining. But I think ultimately what is going to matter is what the voters of Alabama think of these two candidates. I do think Roy Moore is the more colorful, the louder, the crazier one. I think he can out-crazy even Donald Trump. And I think that's maybe more of the story, is like he is a bigger draw than Luther Strange because he's more interesting.
And I think I buy that, and yet, Jonathan, what makes him more interesting is where the Republican Party is going, which is he literally preferred to have a talk radio parade around his Ten Commandments monument fight than actually holding the serious power he had as a judge in that state.
Yeah, I mean, he was, you know, the Ten Commandments. He was also, when he was sitting on like he was the chief judge of the state, and when marriage equality was made law of the land, he sent a directive to his judges telling them to ignore the law, to ignore the Supreme Court. That's what Alabama is, the choice that Alabama has to make, whether they're going to vote for Luther Strange or whether they're going to vote for Roy Moore, a person who, as was just previously said, is somebody who's, I think, colorful is a nice way of saying somebody, is a nice way of describing someone who seems to behave in a way where he feels that he is a law unto himself. And really sometimes I think just from things that I've read about him, it feels like God is on his side. And that is a very dangerous position to be in.
Right. We've sort of lapsed into catalog speak. You know, it's a colorful pop of color blanket. Also, he's lawless. He's totally lawless. So, Jonathan Capehart, thank you for spending part of your Friday night with us. Erin Gloria Ryan, you're coming back for Fallback Fridays.
I am?
Yes. Coming up,
Thanks,
Jim Comey out today with his first public comments since his bombshell Senate testimony. From his own party on Trump Care. The key player is John McCain, who came out swinging today and may ultimately be the veto of the Republicans' last-ditch effort to revive Trump Care by next week's deadline. McCain saying tonight he cannot in good conscience vote for the new Trump Care effort. This is a big deal. It means, obviously, Democrats only now need one more vote to save Obamacare and administer another bipartisan thumping of this young president, saving health care for at least 21 million people. That's the policy side. And enshrining a victory with the word Obama in it, that's the political side. Obamacare does still hang in the balance because of that one vote. But tonight, just one, then it would be done. Senator Susan Collins says she's leaning against the new GOP plan. She was part of the McCain coalition that dramatically balked the last effort at Trump care on the Senate floor. Alaska Maverick Lisa Murkowski also up in the air tonight. Pence also now coming out with a late-day plea.
We cannot in good conscience abandon this cause. The American people are hurting. As President Trump has made clear, inaction is not an option. Now, let me be clear. A vote against Graham Cassidy is a vote to save Obamacare.
This is the biggest domestic fight of the last decade, and it hangs in the balance right now. So look at what's happening. The Trump White House is rolling out Mike Pence, not the president, and that's pretty telling. This is a president who tends to lose more Senate votes than he gains, and perhaps the best thing he could do for Republicans right now on this fight tonight is disappear, because even in a Republican-controlled Senate, when the choice is boiled down to Obamacare versus Trump, Obamacare has been winning. It's another reminder of how unpredictable politics is, especially when you have a deal maker in the White House who looks boxed in and stuck, leading from behind. I want to bring in right now Howard Fineman, Global Editorial Director for the Huffington Post. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, Howard. What is happening?
Well, I think there are two things happening. One, on a substantive level, there are a lot of doubts about this bill. And not just from Democrats. A lot of Republicans either don't know the details or are concerned about what impact it might have. And then politically, as you said, Donald Trump pounding the table rhetorically is not necessarily a winner to keep the Republican coalition together. In the case of John McCain, who I've covered literally for decades, pounding the table by Donald Trump is certain to drive John McCain in the other direction, which is exactly what happened tonight in a move that I think is going to kill the bill.
I want to play for you Jimmy Kimmel, who obviously has been in this, not really by choice as a political matter. I think it's fascinating to see someone who came out and spoke, as I think everyone knows, about his child, about how healthcare works in this country, then gets into it with Senator Cassidy, who, of course, is now selling here this thing hanging right now as of this hour tonight by one vote, by a thread. Listen to Jimmy Kimmel talking about his qualifications and all this last night.
You know, a lot of people have been saying that I'm not qualified to talk about this, and that is true. I'm not qualified to talk about this, but I think those people forget Bill Cassidy named this test after me. Am I supposed to just be quiet about that?
Has this backfired on Senator Cassidy?
Well, yes, it has, because Jimmy Kimmel has very artfully framed this in terms of the question of pre-existing conditions. In other words, who gets coverage based on whether they're sick when they come into the program, and lifetime spending on a particular illness, which is particularly apt in Jimmy Kimmel's case because of the well-known travails of his little boy. So Jimmy Kimmel on those two topics has focused and been fierce, and I think been very effective. Last night on Jimmy Kimmel's show, he had Senator Al Franken, a critic of the Cassidy bill from Minnesota, who's very knowledgeable and stuck to those talking points. Actually, the Democrats, oddly enough, led by Jimmy Kimmel, focused on some of the most personal, most telling, and most emotional aspects of the attack, which I think has helped. And in John McCain's case, this is John McCain returning to the John McCain of 2000, right, whom I covered as the Maverick.
So let's pause on that.
This is him again.
And I want to get you on that, and also I have Joy Reid by my side about to join us. So you speak about that. This is not, of course, the first friction between McCain and Trump. People remember in the campaign, plus in February when Trump tweeted, McCain's been losing so long, he doesn't know how to win anymore. Days later, it was at that security conference in Germany, McCain firing back.
This panel is going to ask us to consider whether the West will survive. In recent years, this question would invite accusations of hyperbole and alarmism, not this year. If ever there was a time to treat this question with a deadly seriousness, it is now.
The respectful implication being that the president not being serious, and then after Trump's comments on Charlottesville, McCain wrote, the president is often poorly informed and can be impulsive, but we are not his subordinates. We don't answer to him. And then, of course, back to health care. McCain famously killing the last Republican attempt to get Trump care in over Obamacare in dramatic fashion. There it was, and there it is. I want to bring in MSNBC's Joy Reid, the host of AM Joy, as well as David Litt, a former Obama administration official and author of a new book, Thanks, Obama, My Hopi Changey White House Years. Joy, last time, he did it straight up on the floor, like that.
Yep.
This time he's coming out earlier. Is that worse for Trump?
You know, I think any time that he is at war with John McCain, it's worse for Trump. And the reason for that is, you know, John McCain is not defending Obamacare here. You've never heard him actually defend the law itself. He's defending the Senate. And I think one of the things that has become the most broken with Donald Trump in the White House is the idea of the co-equal branch of government behaving as something other than supine lackeys of the White House. The Republican Party, including its leadership in both the House and Senate, have behaved as if they're Donald Trump's employees. And John McCain is the guy standing up saying, actually, we're not his employees. And so he's defending the process. You know, the only way that Donald Trump wins in Capitol Hill, where he has no friends, actually, where he doesn't know anyone except Chuck Schumer, he's the only person he actually knew before he came to Washington. The only way that he wins is if the chaos forces the Republican Party to fear the base so much that they just do whatever he says. So he can't afford to keep alienating John McCain, and yet he doesn't learn. You know, right. Donald Trump doesn't learn. He is not a friend of John McCain. John McCain owes him nothing.
Well, you make such an insightful point, as you so often do, Joy, that it's not necessarily Obamacare being defended, right? But it is about, as you say, the actual constitutional dimension of who's in charge. There's a Jamaican saying, I don't know if you know it.
I know every Jamaican saying.
Do you?
Well, maybe.
We run things not run we.
That's correct.
And this is John McCain saying, we run this Senate, and it's not going to be run roughshod over by someone who doesn't show a lot of respect for how government works.
Exactly. And the thing, you know, Donald Trump has exploded a lot of norms. And one of the most alarming things about him being president is that it does call into question whether the institutions created, you know, a couple hundred years ago are strong enough to withstand someone like him. Somebody who doesn't seem to really understand the office or respect the limits and the constraints on it. Well, at some point, the American people need the co-equal branch of government down the street to actually stand up and be a co-equal branch of government to rein him in. The strongest argument that Democrats have in 2018 is that Republicans are incapable of doing it and unwilling to do it. They're unwilling to be the Senate and be the House. They have decided to be lackeys. They've decided to be employees. John McCain is the one guy saying, no, actually, we don't want to be lackeys and employees. That's not a lot for Democrats to hang their hats on, by the way, because John McCain is not on Democrats' side on any of these policy questions at all. He's probably on Lindsey Graham's side. But all he's saying is, unless we go back to the process, the regular order, unless the institution works, I'm not playing along.
Right. And it's so interesting, as you point out, I mean, this goes to whether Republican fan fiction can be governable or not, and this is an example of it not. Howard, I want to put up on the screen Jimmy Kimmel's response. This came just into our newsroom. Obviously, he's been all over this debate, but he praises John McCain here coming out against Trump care today and writes, Jimmy Kimmel says, thank you, Senator John McCain, for being a hero again and again and now again. Howard, as mentioned, you've covered him for a long time. Walk us through the kind of leadership we're seeing here from John McCain today.
Well, I covered his 2000 campaign, which was the best McCain. That was John McCain saying that he was for bipartisanship, that he was searching for consensus, even while he was running as a maverick and a sort of outsider who also wanted regular order in a way. And to follow on what Joy was saying, the interesting thing here is he's Mr. Maverick in the current context of Trump's Washington. But what he's arguing for is tradition. Don't forget, John McCain is third or fourth generation Navy. His father was an admiral. His grandfather was an admiral. He has a sense of continuity of the Constitution and service in America. And it's that, I think, above all, that motivates his distaste and disdain for Donald Trump. And the feeling between the two of them is mutual. They are barely in the same world. And the Donald Trump, the John McCain you saw today is the John McCain of 2000. And as he faces the illnesses and the battles that he faces now, I think he is consciously seeking to recapture the energy and the emotion and the best of himself politically that he saw in that earlier campaign.
And that's all the politics and the relationships. We have David Litt here, and I want to play something for you from one of your colleagues in the Obama administration, Josh Earnest, who, as you know, is a much better communicator than you. You know that. You're just a writer.
Yes.
He's a talker.
Totally fair.
I'm just messing with you. But in one blizzard last night, on The Last Word, where I was watching him and Joy Reid last night, I was glued to my TV screen with all the different facts you guys were unfurling, and he basically went through the policy of this. Put the personalities aside. He talks about where people and companies involved in healthcare are on this new Trump Care bill. Take a listen.
It seems that every single group that is in any way involved in providing health care to Americans opposes this bill. Hospital executives oppose this bill because it's bad for hospitals. Doctors oppose this bill because it's bad for doctors. Nurses oppose this bill because it's bad for nurses. Patient advocates oppose this bill because it's bad for patients.
I mean, David, not everyone in healthcare loves Obamacare, but Josh Earnest is arguing everyone in healthcare hates Trump care.
That's exactly right. You have the Republican Party and Donald Trump basically saying, we want to rip healthcare away from 20 million people because we don't like Barack Obama very much. That's what the argument boils down to. It's not the care part, it's the Obama part. And it doesn't make sense. There's a reason that Obamacare is now at 54% popularity. We would have loved that back when we were in the White House. And Graham Cassidy, I think I saw today, is at 24%. This makes no political sense. It makes no policy sense. And I think that's what Josh is getting at.
Howard Fineman, thank you for being here and reflecting on some of your reporting history. David, stay with me. Joy, stay with me. I want to ask you, Joy, if you could interview anyone on your show this weekend, who would it be? I'll ask you that, okay? That's warning. And then you get to answer. Ahead, we have some other really important breaking news that just came into the newsroom. The federal government now identifying specifically for the first time the 21 states targeted by Russian hackers. Yes, they really are only getting around to doing that tonight. Trump also breaking a Twitter silence on Russia. We'll tell you what it means. Later, Steve Bannon going to war with his old boss. Bannon and Trump squaring off in good old Alabama, a battle for the base. And Jim Comey made his first public appearance today ever since that Senate testimony. We're going to show it to you and what it means and speak to a good friend of his. I'm Ari Melber, and you're watching The Beat on MSNBC.
Russia investigation. Politico reporting just moments ago that Robert Mueller wants phone records from Air Force One. Those records related to the statement written on the plane about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians. You remember when they said it was about the orphans? The Washington Post has reported that President Trump himself dictated that statement from Air Force One. The White House says he only weighed in. That news, as we are learning, Mueller could also want to look at Sean Spicer's notebooks. Sounds like Jim Comey's notebooks. Axios reporting Spicer was known to fill notebook after notebook at the White House, the practice dating back to his time at the RNC. Who knew that Sean was so studious, where he reportedly filled black books emblazoned with the party's seal? One White House official saying people are going to wish they'd been nicer to Spicer. He was in a lot of meetings. With me, James Melendrez, a former federal prosecutor who led the prosecution against former CIA Director David Petraeus, and Nick Confessori, political reporter with the New York Times. James, let's start with you. I am shocked. Never did I think Sean Spicer would be the kind of guy to keep copious notes, especially given how much he flubbered and said, I don't know, at the podium. Why could these notes be so useful?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. The notes can be very useful to a prosecutor in a couple of ways. First of all, these are very important tools legally in a courtroom. Contemporaneous notes can be used for a variety of purposes, including impeaching a witness who testifies inconsistently with those notes. They can also be used to refresh a witness's recollection if that person is having difficulty remembering answers to particular questions. And then to the extent that that memory deficit continues even after being refreshed with those notes can be introduced substantively at trial. And so, legally, these notes have significant import for the investigation and any future court proceedings that are undertaken. Practically speaking, any white-collar attorney counseling Mr. Spicer knows all that. And so the practical consequence is that not if, but when Mr. Spicer is interviewed or provides testimony before a grand jury, he is going to be well advised to hew pretty closely to what is included in those notes.
But humor me here, James. What's to say he's not, he's telling the truth in his notebook? I mean, people have been known to tell tall tales in their journals, tell the story that they want to be the truth.
That's something that I'm sure the investigators and the prosecutors will factor into their decision about, how much reliance to put on those notes. But remember, former Director Mueller, is relying not just on these notes, but other documents, other email communications, other records, other interviews that are all part of this investigation. And so, while the notebooks are an important part of the investigation, any prosecutor working on this will certainly want to ensure that there is corroboration before relying on them exclusively.
Nick, you've covered this and Sean for quite some time. Do you believe this is going to be the tool in which he seeks revenge? He just doesn't seem like a vengeful kind of guy.
Look, Sean was kind of asked to do a hard job. And in exchange, he was berated and humiliated by his own boss.
Hold on a second.
Kicked to the curb.
Hold on a second. He wasn't asked to do a hard job. This was Sean's dream job, okay?
To do it.
He wasn't drafted and sent to Nam. He worked in the White House.
But to your point about revenge, Steph, he was treated badly by the president and kicked to the curb. So if he wants revenge, this is one way. I do think that kind of more important to Sean right now is avoiding needing a lawyer, is staying kind of out of the line of fire. If he can hand these over and say, this is what I know, and cooperate with Mueller, it actually may save him some legal bills.
And we know those legal bills are mounting for a lot of people tied to the president, though the president himself has the luxury of getting donors and the RNC to pick up the bill for him. James, Mueller reportedly wants documents on Spicer's statements on Comey. I want to share what Sean Spicer said before and after he was fired. Take a look at this.
Is the president comfortable having an FBI director that gives out free passes serve during his administration?
The president has confidence in the director.
He made a determination that the FBI director had lost his confidence, made a recommendation to the Attorney General. The Attorney General concurred with that and forwarded that recommendation today on to the president, who agreed with their conclusions.
Could the notebooks contradict what Sean Spicer said at the time to the media at the podium? Because we know the president undercut his own team, who that Monday, Tuesday of that week went out there defending one reason for firing James Comey. And then President Trump sat down with Lester Holt and told a totally different story.
It's certainly possible that to the extent there were deliberations inside the White House before Sean Spicer's statement that reflected, other reasoning for the firing, that those would be included in the notebook. So I think that is something that Mueller and his team will certainly be interested in reviewing. And just one point picking up on Nick's comments, I think it is inconceivable that Spicer would engage with a special counsel without advice of an attorney, and I expect that he has retained an attorney for that purpose, or will be doing so very shortly.
All right, I need to share with you what Sean Spicer said in an exclusive interview today, because this one blew my mind.
Have you ever lied to the American people?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I'm cheating on my taxes.
Unequivocally, you can say no?
Look, again, if you want to find something, I've not knowingly done anything to do that, no.
Okay, I'm sorry. My children are both liars and sometimes they don't know. An answer like that, I didn't know I lied, from the press secretary of the White House. We're gonna accept that answer. I didn't know that I lied. Your word is your bond. You're standing up representing the White House before the American people. That argument is gonna fly, Nick?
Look, it depends on the example, Steph. There's a long catalog of things that he said from the podium that he had to have known were not true, starting with the first thing he said from the podium, or among the first things, about the crowd size and Obama and the inauguration. But press secretaries are sometimes kept out of the loop of the White House for just this reason, so they can be sent out to say something different. And we will find out from the notes.
When he was talking about voter fraud, he was referencing absolute nonsense poppycocks, but said there were some reports out there. I mean, pure nonsense.
Like I said, there's a long list of statements he's made from the podium that are not true. But there are some things he may actually have thought were true that he was told were true from internally that we're going to find out later were not true.
Okay, James, let's get on the airplane. Air Force One, when President Trump and his team were flying home from Berlin, I believe it was, and that's when they concocted the story about Don Jr. having that meeting with the Russian lawyer about the orphans. It sounds like Bob Mueller could be interested in phone records. Why exactly does he want them?
Well, he wants those records as a starting point in investigating who may have participated in crafting the statement that you just mentioned, Stephanie. And those phone records, would demonstrate who was called, how frequently they were called, what the duration of those calls were, and would be a basis for further interviews of anyone on either end of those conversations.
This is an extraordinary topic, and it's not going anywhere. Here's something I know. The president saying over and over, Russia is an absolute ruse. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Doesn't seem like a ruse to me. All right, James, thank you so much. Nick, always great to see you. We have to turn to another story, really a key part of this Russia probe, and of course, it's social media. We know the massive role it played in this election. Today, Facebook saying it will turn over 3,000, did you hear that number? 3,000 Russia-linked ads to Congress. CEO and founder